When Pyrath first witnessed a human voluntarily launching themselves headfirst into another being at high velocity, he was convinced he was observing some form of ritual combat to the death. The fact that both participants got up laughing afterward only confused him more. But it wasn't the brutality that truly shocked him. It was the raw emotion on their faces. Joy, pure, unadulterated joy. By the 3 rings, they're doing it again. Pyrath's secondary breathing sacs inflated with alarm as he watched the vidscreen showing humanity's first cultural exchange event on New Kalara. His crystalline appendages clinked nervously against his observation pod. This wasn't supposed to be his assignment. He was a theoretical xenobiologist, not a cultural liaison, but fate had other plans. His colleague Mithrand extended his sensory stalks toward the display, their usual silvery sheen dulled with concern. Fascinating. The human delegation claimed this was entertainment. Their medical records indicate an average of 2.3 injuries per match. How has their species survived? The game being demonstrated was something called Rugby, and it seemed to consist primarily of humans colliding with each other while fighting over an oval-shaped ball. The Kellerans, being a species that communicated through subtle vibrations in their crystalline bodies, found the entire concept deeply disturbing. Their own recreational activities involved harmonious resonance chambers and synchronized light diffraction, activities that explicitly avoided physical contact. Noah Sullivan, the human cultural attach, stood before the gathered Kelleran High Council, grinning from ear to ear. He was younger than most diplomatic representatives, barely 30, with a rugby player's build barely contained by his formal attire. And that, honored council members, is what we call a try. 5 points. The council chamber erupted in a cascade of alarmed harmonics that humans couldn't hear but that made every crystal fixture in the room resonate uncomfortably. High Councilor Talus' entire body flickered with distress patterns, his usually pristine crystalline form clouding with anxiety. Mr. Sullivan, the High Councilor's translator device warbled. Are you suggesting we allow our youth to participate in this ritualistic violence? Our species has spent millennia evolving beyond physical confrontation. We communicate through light and vibration precisely to avoid such barbarism. Noah ran a hand through his sweat-dampened hair, his smile never wavering. It's not violence, Your Excellency. It's sport, team building, character development. He paused, then added more softly, it's about trust. Trust. The words sent ripples through the council chamber. Trust was sacred to the Kellerans. Their crystalline bodies were incredibly durable in some ways, but a single crack in the wrong place could be catastrophic. Their entire society was built on careful movements and calculated distances. In the observation pod above, Pyrath couldn't tear his sensors away from the spectacle. Despite his initial horror, he found himself oddly fascinated. The humans moved with such purpose, such joy. Their bodies were so flexible, so resilient, so unlike the rigid crystalline forms of his own people. I want to try it, he announced suddenly. Mithrand's entire body flashed red with shock, a rare display of emotion from the usually composed scientist. I have your logic circuits fractured. You'd shatter into 1,000 pieces. Think of your position, your family line. 9 generations of theoretical xenobiologists ended because you wanted to throw yourself at humans. But Pyrath had already made up his mind. The next day, he approached Noah after the demonstration, ignoring the disapproving harmonics from his colleagues. Teach me, he said simply. Noah blinked in surprise, then broke into a wide smile. Now that's what I'm talking about. But we might need to make some modifications. What followed was 2 weeks of intensive engineering work as Noah and his team collaborated with Kelleran materials scientists to develop a flexible polymer coating that would allow Kellerans to participate in sports safely. The project nearly failed twice. First, when the initial prototype shattered during testing, and again when funding was nearly pulled after a particularly conservative council member called it an attempt to weaponize our youth. But Pyrath refused to give up. He spent his nights in the lab, fine-tuning the molecular structure of the polymer, using his xenobiology background to merge human flexibility with Kelleran crystalline patterns. The breakthrough came when he realized they needed to work with their natural resonance, not against it. They called it Crystal Flex, and it revolutionized both human-Kelleran relations and Kelleran society itself. But the real test was yet to come. The first mixed human-Kelleran rugby match was scheduled for the Festival of Harmonious Light, a decision that horrified traditionalists. The humans had to wear special padding to protect themselves from their crystalline teammates, and the Kellerans moved with an awkward grace in their crystal flex suits. The morning of the match, Pyrath stood in the locker room, staring at his reflection in the polished wall. The crystal flex suit hummed softly against his form, its protective field synchronized with his natural resonance. "Having second thoughts?" Noah asked, adjusting his own protective gear. 9 generations of my family line have observed other species from safe distances, Pyrath's translator crackled. "Today I break that tradition. If I shatter—" "You won't," Noah interrupted. "That's what trust is about." The game itself was chaos. Beautiful, terrifying chaos. The humans had to unlearn years of rugby instincts, while the Kellerans had to overcome millennia of evolutionary programming that screamed at them to avoid contact. The first collision between Pyrath and a human player sent gasps through the stadium, followed by amazed murmurs when both players bounced back up. But it was in the final minutes that everything changed. Pyrath had the ball, running toward the try line when he saw a human player charging toward him. In that split second, his crystalline brain calculated thousands of possible outcomes, most ending in catastrophic structural failure. Instead of avoiding the collision, he embraced it. The impact resonated through the stadium. The crystal flex suit flared with energy, dispersing the force in a dazzling display of light and color. When Pyrath scored his first try, the harmonics of joy he emitted shattered every window in the stadium, and shattered centuries of cultural barriers along with them. Word spread quickly through the galaxy. Other species became curious about this strange human practice of recreational collision. The Galatinus collective of Proxima Centauri developed their own version using temporary solidification fields. The methane-breathing Draxians created low-gravity variants that incorporated their natural ability to float. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. As the sport grew in popularity, so did the opposition. Traditional Kelleran religious leaders claimed it would destroy their way of life. Conservative politicians warned of the humanization of their youth. And then came the resonance crisis. During a particularly intense match, a Kelleran player named Sirath suffered a suit malfunction. The crystal flex field flickered for just a moment, but a moment was all it took. The impact created a crack that resonated through his crystalline form, threatening to shatter him completely. The stadium fell silent, the kind of silence that feels like a physical weight. Humans and Kellerans watched in horror as Sirath's form began to splinter, destructive harmonics spreading through his crystal matrix. That's when Pyrath did something unprecedented. He dropped to his knees beside Sirath and began to vibrate, producing a counter-resonance that aligned with the crack's harmonic pattern. One by one, other Kelleran players joined him, their combined vibrations creating a stabilizing field around their fallen teammate. The humans, unable to produce the necessary vibrations, formed a protective circle around them, shielding them from the panicked crowd's chaotic energies. For 6 hours they maintained their positions, until medical technicians could stabilize Sirath's crystal structure. The incident nearly ended the experiment entirely. The High Council called an emergency session, with many calling for an immediate ban on all contact sports. The future of human-Kelleran relations hung by a thread. That's when Sirath himself asked to address the council. "Look at what happened when I was injured," his translator hummed. "Humans and Kellerans, working together instinctively to save one life. Is this not the very essence of what we aspire to be? Yes, I could have shattered. But instead, I learned that I am stronger than I knew, and that I am never alone." 5 years later, Noah stood in the packed stadium of New Bangkok, watching teams from 12 different species compete in the first intergalactic Rugby Cup. His old friend Pyrath, now the captain of the Kelleran national team, approached him before their match against the human squad. "You know what the best part is?" Pyrath's translator crackled with amusement. "The High Council still thinks this is a diplomatic exercise in cross-cultural understanding." Noah laughed. "Isn't it, though?" Perhaps Pyrath adjusted his crystal flex suit, now the 15th generation of the technology he helped pioneer. But mostly it's just fun to knock the living daylights out of each other in a socially acceptable way. The human grinned. "Now you're getting it." The match that followed would go down in history as one of the greatest sporting events ever witnessed. The Kellerans had developed their own unique style, using their crystalline forms to reflect light in complex patterns to confuse their opponents, while their crystal flex suits allowed them to bounce and ricochet off each other in ways that defied both physics and common sense. The humans, led by team captain Isaac Granite Barrett, countered with their trademark unpredictability and sheer stubborn determination. The score remained tied until the final minutes when Pyrath executed a perfect light-splitting feint, passed to his teammate Lyrath, who then used his crystalline structure to refract himself into what appeared to be 7 identical players running in different directions. The humans fell for it, and the real Lyrath slipped through to score the winning try. The stadium erupted in a cacophony of cheers, harmonics, and various other species-specific expressions of joy. Later, at the award ceremony, High Counselor Talith presented the trophy to the Kelleran team, his crystalline form now showing the faintest traces of iridescent patterns, the Kelleran equivalent of embracing change. "Your dedication to interspecies cultural exchange is most commendable," the translator warbled, but there was a new undertone to the harmonics, something almost like amusement. Pyrath accepted the trophy, its crystalline surface reflecting the stadium lights in a dazzling display. "Indeed, Your Excellency. Through this ancient human ritual, we have truly learned to understand each other better." Behind him, Noah struggled to keep a straight face as Isaac nursed an impressive bruise from where he'd collided with a Kelleran player's crystalline shoulder. Understanding through controlled violence, Isaac muttered good-naturedly, "Maybe the only kind that really sticks." The aftermath of the first intergalactic Rugby Cup led to an explosion of cross-species sporting events. The Kellerans, once known throughout the galaxy as the most rigid and formal of species, became famous for their innovative approach to athletic competition. Crystal Flex technology found applications in everything from construction to space exploration. But perhaps most importantly, it gave species across the galaxy a new way to connect. As Pyrath often said in interviews, there's something universal about the desire to run full tilt into someone else while chasing a ball. It transcends biology, culture, and even basic common sense. The real breakthrough came 3 years later, when the first generation of Kelleran youth raised with Crystal Flex technology began to emerge. They moved differently, more fluidly, more confidently. They had learned to trust their own resilience, to embrace controlled chaos. Some traditionalists still grumbled, but they couldn't deny the results. A new generation of Kellerans who combined their species' natural grace with unprecedented adaptability. And that, really, was humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy, not the sport itself, but the recognition that sometimes the most meaningful diplomacy happens not in formal chambers or through careful negotiations, but on a field, in the mud, with an oddly shaped ball and a complete disregard for personal safety. Years later, when asked about the success of the interspecies sports program, Noah would simply smile and say, "Turns out the desire to do silly things for fun is the most universal trait of all." Then he would show visitors his most prized possession, a Crystal Flex medallion, given to him by Pyrath's daughter, the first Kelleran to be born with natural micro-flexing abilities, an evolutionary response to 3 generations of Crystal Flex technology. The human Kelleran Rugby continues to this day, though they've had to replace every window in every stadium with transparent aluminum. Some traditions, it seems, are worth the property damage. And in the great cosmic dance of species and civilizations, perhaps that's the most important lesson, that progress doesn't always come through careful planning and dignified discourse. Sometimes it comes through scraped knees, broken windows, and the pure, simple joy of playing a game.